This movie didn't just invent a new kind of horror, it was inspired by a real-world airline explosion that killed 230 people. The cast was violently thrown around inside a mechanical plane rig. A stuntman left the set with 47 stitches in his head, and the ending included a pregnancy twist that test audiences absolutely hated. Today on Iconic TV Rewind, we're uncovering 20 weird facts about Final Destination, the movie that gave all millennials an irrational fear of driving behind log trucks.
Death is not the end.
Fact number 1. The real airline disaster that inspired Flight 180. The terrifying explosion of Flight 180 wasn't born purely from imagination. It drew heavy inspiration from the real-life crash of TWA Flight 800 in 1996, when a Boeing 747 exploded shortly after takeoff from New York, killing all 230 people on board. The writers studied news coverage of that disaster, paying close attention to witness accounts, debris patterns, and the sheer unpredictability of what happened in the sky. What made it even more unsettling is that they didn't exaggerate the randomness. They leaned into it. The idea that something ordinary could become catastrophic in seconds became the foundation of the film's philosophy. By grounding the opening disaster in something painfully real, the movie created a level of dread that audiences could not shake, because deep down, they knew that the unthinkable had already happened once before. Fact number 2. The airplane set was a mechanical nightmare. The chaos inside Flight 180 feels disturbingly authentic because much of it was physically real. The production built a full airplane cabin mounted on a massive hydraulic gimbal that violently tilted, dropped, and shook the actors as if the aircraft were losing control. Performers were strapped into their seats while luggage compartments burst open, objects flew through the air, and the floor shifted beneath them. Many of the screams captured on camera weren't rehearsed reactions, but instinctive responses to being thrown around in a confined space with very little stability. The violent motion made it difficult to maintain footing or even orientation, which only intensified the panic on screen. Instead of relying entirely on visual effects, the filmmakers chose physical brutality, and that decision gave the sequence a suffocating realism that still holds up decades later. Fact number 3. A stunt gone wrong left 47 stitches. One of the film's most shocking death scenes nearly caused a real tragedy behind the scenes. During the climactic Paris sequence involving a collapsing sign, a piece of metal unexpectedly broke loose during a stunt setup and struck a stunt performer in the head. The impact was severe enough to require 47 stitches, and for a moment, the controlled illusion of chaos became dangerously close to genuine disaster. What makes the story even more unsettling is that portions of that footage were still used in the final cut because the unexpected intensity added to the realism of the moment. The franchise became known for elaborate chain reaction deaths that felt dangerously plausible, and in this case, the illusion blurred with reality in a way that cast and crew would never forget. Fact number 4. Death originally had a face. In early drafts and conceptual planning, death was not meant to remain invisible. The filmmakers considered depicting a literal recurring presence, a distorted, melting visage that would appear throughout the story as a personification of fate stalking the survivors. Concept art explored something far more overt and supernatural than what audiences ultimately saw, but the idea was eventually abandoned. The team realized that once death had a visible form, the fear would become finite, almost containable. By removing the physical manifestation and allowing the threat to remain unseen, the film tapped into something more existential. Instead of running from a monster, the characters were running from inevitability itself. That creative choice transformed the movie from a simple slasher concept into something more abstract and psychologically unnerving. Fact number 5. The ending almost included a pregnancy twist. The version of the film audiences know, the brutal Paris button scene that reinforces the inescapable pattern, was not the original plan. Early versions of the script included a softer conclusion in which Clear was revealed to be pregnant with Alex's child, implying that new life had somehow disrupted Death's design. The story would have ended on a more ambiguous, almost hopeful note, with the survivors visiting a memorial and reflecting on what they had endured. Test audiences, however, rejected the idea. Viewers felt that the pregnancy twist diluted the movie's central message that death cannot be cheated, only postponed. In response, the studio reshot and restructured the finale, replacing potential optimism with one last cruel chain reaction. That decision hardened the film's identity and cemented the franchise's defining philosophy: survival is temporary, and fate always recalculates. Fact number 6. The beach scene was originally much darker. The quiet beach moment between Alex and Clear was never meant to feel innocent. In early drafts of the script, that scene was written as a full romantic consummation, setting up the pregnancy reveal that would have altered the film's ending entirely. The intimacy wasn't included merely for character development. It was meant to serve as a narrative pivot point, suggesting that new life might interrupt death's design. When the pregnancy storyline was removed after negative test screenings, the scene had to be heavily toned down, stripped of its explicit implication, and reframed as emotional closure rather than a turning point. What remains on screen is restrained, almost subdued, but beneath it lies the ghost of a completely different movie, one that nearly shifted the franchise into a far more sentimental direction before the studio realized audiences wanted inevitability, not hope. Fact number 7. Final Destination was originally an X-Files episode. Before it became a theatrical horror phenomenon, the entire concept began as a spec script written for an episode of The X-Files. The original premise involved a character who foresees a disaster and prevents it, only to discover that death itself begins correcting the timeline. When the script circulated in Hollywood, producers recognized that the idea was too expansive for television and had the potential to stand alone as a feature film. The paranormal tone was scaled back, Mulder and Scully were removed, and the mythology was reshaped into something more grounded and relentless. What started as a single episodic concept transformed into a franchise built entirely around the mechanics of fate. It's unsettling to realize that one of the most recognizable horror series of the 2000s was born not from a traditional slasher blueprint, but from a rejected television pitch that refused to die. Fact number 8. Tony Todd was written as Death's voice. The mysterious mortician, portrayed by Tony Todd, is never explicitly identified as Death, yet his presence feels too deliberate to be coincidence. In early discussions, the character was conceived as a kind of mouthpiece for the unseen force governing the survivor's fate, delivering cryptic warnings without directly interfering. His calm explanations of Death's design give structure to chaos, almost as if he understands rules the others cannot see. The script avoids confirming his true nature, which only fuels fan theories that he represents death personified, observing the game rather than playing it. By refusing to clarify his role, the film adds a layer of mythic ambiguity that deepens with each sequel. He's not a villain in the traditional sense, nor a savior, but something in between. A reminder that the pattern is already in motion. Fact number 9. The kill designs were based on real-world fears. What makes the deaths in Final Destination so disturbing is not just their creativity, but their plausibility. The writers and director intentionally drew from everyday anxieties: airplane turbulence, kitchen accidents, slippery bathrooms, unstable vehicles, and exaggerated them just enough to feel cinematic without becoming absurd. Each elaborate chain reaction functions like a nightmare version of ordinary life, where a spilled drink or a misplaced object becomes the first domino in a fatal sequence. Instead of inventing supernatural weapons or impossible traps, the film weaponizes the mundane. That creative philosophy turned routine environments into ticking time bombs and made audiences hyper-aware of their surroundings long after leaving the theater. The fear lingers because the setup feels uncomfortably familiar, as though disaster could unfold from the smallest overlooked detail. Fact number 10. The train track car was engineered to look uncontrollable. The violent train track collision appears chaotic and spontaneous, yet it was meticulously engineered. The production team pre-cut and weakened structural sections of the vehicle so that it would crumple in specific ways upon impact, ensuring the destruction looked explosive while remaining controlled. Multiple safety measures were built into the setup, including reinforced stunt positioning and carefully timed mechanical triggers, allowing the scene to appear wildly unpredictable without placing performers at unnecessary risk. What makes the sequence so effective is the illusion of randomness, the sense that the car's destruction unfolds naturally as part of death's chain reaction. In reality, every twist of metal and burst of debris was calculated. That balance between chaos and precision became the franchise's signature formula, making each disaster feel terrifyingly inevitable. Fact number 11. The movie secretly shows you the deaths before they happen. Long before the chain reactions unfold, the film quietly telegraphs exactly how several characters will die. Shadows fall across faces in shapes that resemble the instruments of their eventual fate. Reflections in glass and metal subtly frame objects that will later become lethal. In one scene, stained glass imagery mirrors a fatal stabbing that hasn't yet occurred, embedding the outcome into the background long before the audience recognizes it. These visual cues are never emphasized or explained, which makes them more disturbing in hindsight. On a rewatch, it becomes clear that the film is not simply reacting to chaos, it is constructing a design from the beginning. The inevitability isn't improvised. It is embedded in the environment, hiding in plain sight. Fact number 12. Paris was predicted from the beginning. The film doesn't just foreshadow individual deaths, it quietly signals the final location of its climax. Early in the story, a Touring France book appears with imagery of gallows and ominous references to mortality. A page referencing Jim Morrison's grave in Paris includes the phrase, "This is the end," an eerie detail that feels almost accidental on first viewing. Only later does the significance become clear when the survivors find themselves beneath the Eiffel Tower for the final chain reaction. The destination was never random. It was planted from the start, woven into props and dialogue so subtly that audiences rarely register it until hindsight makes the pattern obvious. The ending was not chosen. It was seeded. Fact number 13. Alex's birthday was a fatal clue. Even the smallest details carry weight, including Alex's birthday, which aligns with the time of Flight 180's departure, 9:25. That numerical echo may seem trivial at first, but within the logic of the film, it reinforces the idea that fate operates with precision. The repetition of 180 itself, mirrored and echoed throughout the series, suggests circularity, a pattern that resets but never disappears. The story does not present numerology as overt supernatural symbolism, yet the recurrence of specific numbers subtly reinforces the concept of design. The characters believe they are improvising solutions, but the timeline itself appears structured as if the rules were written long before the first premonition ever occurred. Fact number 14. The memorial names were real crew members. When the survivors visit the Flight 180 memorial, the names etched onto the wall are not fictional placeholders. Many of them belong to members of the actual production crew. This choice adds a layer of meta-commentary that deepens the film's eerie tone. The plot revolves around predetermined death lists, and the filmmakers quietly inserted themselves into that list, blurring the boundary between fiction and reality. It becomes an unsettling reminder that while the characters struggle against fate, the actors and crew exist outside the narrative, yet symbolically within it. The wall is not just a prop. It is a quiet acknowledgement that everyone is part of the design. Fact number 15. The pattern was always meant to be unbreakable. One of the most unsettling creative decisions behind the film is that the rules were never designed to be defeated. Early drafts and story discussions explored ways the survivors might permanently escape death's sequence, but those ideas were abandoned. The writers ultimately committed to a philosophy of temporary reprieve rather than victory. Every delay would only rearrange the order. Every survival would only postpone the inevitable. That principle transforms the movie from a traditional horror story into something more existential. There is no final girl, no ultimate triumph, only recalculation. By refusing to offer a permanent solution, the film ensures that the pattern remains intact, looping forward into sequels and leaving the audience with a lingering sense that fate is not something you fight. It is something you momentarily outrun. Fact number 16. The plane's wreckage was rebuilt to feel inescapable. After the explosion sequence, fragments of the aircraft were carefully reconstructed for later scenes to maintain visual continuity, but the production made a deliberate decision to make those spaces feel claustrophobic and suffocating. Clear's attic, built partially from repurposed aircraft materials and tight framing techniques, mirrors the trapped geometry of the cabin itself. Even when characters believe they are hiding or isolating themselves, the environment echoes the structure of the disaster they escaped. Narrow corridors, boxed-in lighting, and compressed camera angles reinforce the idea that the survivors are never truly outside the design. The wreckage may be gone, but the architecture of fate lingers around them, shaping every space into a reminder that Flight 180 was not an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a sequence that cannot be dismantled. Fact number 17. The franchise was built on the idea of recalculation. Unlike traditional horror films where a villain hunts intentionally, Final Destination operates on correction. Once the survivors step off the plane, the narrative doesn't suggest revenge. It suggests imbalance. Death is not emotional and it is not malicious. It is methodical. The order established on Flight 180 becomes a blueprint that must be restored. Each near miss only rearranges the sequence, creating the illusion of hope while tightening the structure behind the scenes. This recalculation concept became the engine of every sequel, transforming the franchise into a cinematic puzzle where audiences begin predicting the order even as the characters attempt to outrun it. The horror does not come from surprise alone, but from the awareness that the math is still being solved. Fact number 18. The opening credits quietly map the death order. Before Flight 180 ever explodes, the film begins telling you who is going to die. The opening credits flash with distorted imagery, fractured glass, blurred photographs, flickering names, and split-second visual interruptions that feel purely stylistic on first viewing. But if you slow the sequence down and pay attention to the rhythm of those flashes, subtle connections begin to form. Objects associated with specific characters appear briefly in alignment with their names, hinting at the manner in which their deaths will unfold. The montage does not announce the order outright, but it establishes a visual pattern that mirrors the progression death will later follow. It is not obvious, and it was never meant to be, yet once you recognize the structure, the credits feel less like decoration and more like a blueprint. The design begins before the premonition even starts. Fact number 19. The color red signals the moment before impact. Throughout the film, red seeps into the frame just before disaster strikes. It appears in brake lights, emergency reflections, warning signs, background glows, and sudden bursts of color that subtly shift the mood seconds before the chain reaction begins. The use of red is not exaggerated or theatrical. It is integrated into natural lighting and environmental detail, making it easy to overlook. Yet, once you notice the pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. The color acts as a silent alarm, conditioning the audience on a subconscious level that something irreversible is about to happen. This visual language reinforces the idea that the environment itself participates in death's design. The warning is always present. It just isn't loud enough for the characters to hear. Fact number 20. The bus scene was designed to feel unfair. One of the most shocking moments in the film happens without build-up, without dramatic music, and without the elaborate domino setup audiences had come to expect. The sudden bus impact arrives mid-conversation, interrupting what feels like an ordinary pause in tension. Behind the scenes, the filmmakers intentionally limited rehearsal timing and avoided telegraphing the exact trigger moment to preserve authentic reactions. The goal was not spectacle, but rupture. By stripping away the extended chain reaction and delivering an abrupt, almost casual death, the film reminds viewers that not every correction comes with warning. Some recalculations are immediate. That unpredictability prevents the audience from settling into a formula and reinforces the franchise's core rule. Just when you think you understand the pattern, it shifts. The explosion of Flight 180 wasn't just a shocking movie moment, it was inspired by a real disaster, a real flight, real lives lost, and that's what makes Final Destination linger long after the credits roll. And maybe that's why it still unsettles people today, because the horror isn't a masked killer or a supernatural demon. It's the idea that everything is already in motion, and you just don't see the chain reaction yet. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the design behind Final Destination, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here on Iconic TV Rewind, we don't just revisit horror movies. We uncover the patterns hiding beneath them.